So in this video, we're going to give a basic overview of BlueSky Integration Studio Designer. The first thing to notice is on the left-hand side are all the different data objects that you can use to build ETL jobs. At the top here is a My Favorite section, so if you're using a lot of objects or certain objects a lot of the time, you can move them up here into your favorites area. And then we have have it broken down into different sections. So data objects would be things like that are data specific, like ODBC, OLADB. You can see we have SQL Server and Oracle and MySQL, PostgreSQL, and all the different data objects that you can use to read and write data from the different sources and destinations. We also have specific objects to some of the MPP databases, such as Netezza and Teradata, IBM DB2, and SAP. We can call ABAP functions. We can read from BW cubes and SAP queries and tables. And also Extreme Data, which is another MPP database. And then we have process objects, which are more process oriented. So if you wanted to write some code, for instance, you could write like a before or after job type of code to do something, like maybe you want to FTP a file or archive a file off somewhere, or do some kind of validations on a file, or anything that you might need to write code for. You can do that with this VB code object. You can also run SQL directly against a database. So if you don't want to do ETL, you want to do more ELT, which is basically the extraction, transformation, and load, but within the database. You're doing everything within SQL. So that makes more sense if you're working with some of the MPP databases. You can also send emails, put sticky notes on your jobs. You can FTP files. So all kinds of different things that you can do in a biz job. And then we have something called a sequence job. And then what that is after you build a bunch of ETL jobs, you can sequence them together to build a process. So say for instance you wanted to run 3 different jobs, so you'd have 3 run jobs on your ETL sequence, and then you would maybe wait for those jobs to complete, and then maybe you want to run a SQL statement and you want to wrap all that in an if statement. Right? So you can do all kinds of like sequencing of your processes, and we'll get into all that in the training. Up here on the toolbar are all your menu items. So if you wanted to create a new job, for instance, you might want to create either a new ETL job or a new sequence job. So an ETL job is a job that's going to go out and read and transform and load data in some way, where a sequence job is more of the batch. That's where I built 3 or 4 ETL jobs, and now I want to batch those things together to make a process. Job control over here is that's where you go in and you control and manage the jobs that you have built in the system. So I have one job out here that I threw out here just for training purposes, and this is, I can see that it ran today. It took less than a minute to run. This current status is finished, and I have all kinds of options here as far as controlling the job. I can run the job or monitor it. I can view the job log to see what happened. I can schedule this job, I can delete it, I can go into version management, all kinds of stuff I can do with the job. And this is the higher level. I built a bunch of jobs, and now I need to manage them, and I need to run them. Okay, so that's job control. And then you have your connector objects. So when you're designing your job, you can connect things up. You can also zoom in. You can view data right in your jobs. And then you can do automatic job documentation. So if I were to create, for instance, a sample job here, I'll just create a new ETL job design. How I would work this is I would basically just take the objects that I want to work with and drag and drop them onto my designer palette. Okay, so I'm going to pull a text object over and a transformation and a SQL Server object, and then I would click on the connector up here to connect them. So you'll notice I'm activating the connector, and then right after the connection is made, the connector gets turned off. So I click the connector again, and I drag and I drop from object to object, and you'll notice this is basically just showing me the flow of my data here. Okay, so we're going to get into creating jobs. I just want to kind of show you, how to, to drag and drop objects from the onto the design panel here and hook them all up. But this right here is the most basic ETL job that you can have. You have an input source. I'm reading data from somewhere. I'm going to transform it. I'm going to do my field level mapping here in the transform object. And then my output object is going to be my SQL Server. And all of this is property based. So I can go into any one of these objects and look at the properties behind them to determine, to make them work basically. So for instance, this is my SQL Server. I'm going to have things like a server. I'm going to have a sign-on, the table name that I want to access, and all that. So we're going to get into all that in the next one where we actually build a job. Okay. So I'll go ahead and close that. And then as far as like the job control, I can open jobs right from the job control window. So I just right click on a job and I can say open design. So here's a job that I pre-created just for sample purposes, and I'm zoomed in here, so I can click the zoom button to zoom in and out. And I can see that I have a text file and I'm writing it to a SQL Server. And then if I double click on the transformation, that's this guy here, this is where I'm going to do my field level mapping. Okay, so I can drag a field from here and drop it over here. And then I can click on the ellipse button here next to each of the individual fields to get to the code behind window. So say for instance I want to do something with this calendar date, I can just click on the code behind window, and everything that I want to do related to transforming this this string, I would just do right here in the code window. Okay, so once everything's mapped, then I would hit compile. That compiles the job. So that's going to compile the job, save it onto the BlueSky Integration Studio server, and then I'll be able to see it in the job control window where then I can manage it. I can run it, and I can monitor it and view the job log and do all those types of activities. Okay, so just for fun, let's go ahead and compile this job. I just click on compile. It says, oh, you made some changes. Do you want to save them? It'll go through the compilation process here. And it says job successfully compiled and replicated to the server. So if you remember, BlueSky Integration Studio is a client-server app. This is the designer window here, and then you have the server. And when you compile a job, that gets compiled and it gets copied up to the BlueSky Integration Studio server, whether the server is on your local machine or whether it's on a different computer in the data center. Okay, so once that is done, then I can right click on it and say run it, and I can monitor it. Okay, so it runs very quickly. This is just a small little sample job, but you can see that I loaded 16,000 records or so. It loaded very quickly. Loaded all 16,000 in about a second. Okay. I can also look at the job log here, and this is everything that happened during the run of this job. So I can see that it was initialized. It came down here. It found the shared domain. Okay. I don't have any parameters yet. We're going to get into that later. And this job actually did a delete statement from a table because I have it set up as clear then insert. So you can see that I did the delete statement here. It deleted the original 16,000 records. And then it started processing the data and then loaded the 16,000 records. And I can see the final output here that it loaded 16,000 records in about a second. Okay, so that's all the log information. The version information, for instance, every time I compile a job, a version gets created. So you'll notice here, I have a few different versions of this job sitting out here. I have one from 11:47 a.m. and then I have one back from 11:22 a.m. So for instance, if I wanted to, I could roll back to that original version of this job. You may have 10 or 15 or 20 different versions in here that you can roll back from 2 years ago if necessary. Okay. The job documentation is really nice. So for instance, if I have a job open here and I click on the documentation, I can click that button there, and I'll just throw it out here to my temp directory. So the documentation for this job was generated in Microsoft Word, and you can see that it creates a snapshot of the job, and then every property and the the transformations and everything that's going on is all documented in this job. So this saves a ton of time as far as the final documentation for all these ETL processes. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted to cover in this section. I just wanted to give you a general feel for the tool. How do you take these objects and drag them onto the design palette? How do you manage your jobs through job control? What are some of the menu items that we talked about up here as far as compiling the job and using the connectors? So now what we're going to do in the next one is actually build our first job. Okay, so we'll see you then.